Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health webinar. We very much appreciate you all joining. My name is Russell Spieth. I'll kind of get it started and then I'll move it over to Jessica. So as a reminder, we are constantly, trying to elicit feedback about how to make these webinars the most beneficial for you all. So we appreciate all the feedback that you have given, and we have tried to incorporate those suggestions into all the webinars we've been doing. So also, a reminder coming forward on Tuesday, February 25th. So Tuesday, February 25th at 11:30 a.m. Dr. Lisa Sontag-Padilla and Michael Dunbar from the RAND Corporation are going to be presenting on their 2017 study of California, the state of California, after they increased funding and programming across the state for mental health for their college students. So they were part of the evaluation arm of that whole process. So that should be a really interesting presentation. And yes, we'll be on the lookout for that registration link. And again, thank you all so much for joining.
All right, thank you, Russell, for getting those important announcements out. My name is Jessica Zavala, and I'm the manager for the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health. And we certainly thank you today for your time and joining us for this presentation. I have the pleasure to introduce both of our presenters today. We'll be hearing from Paul Churchia as well as Avery Afoji. Paul works in the college mental health programs at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation at Boston University. Paul is an instructor as well as a college coach within the NATEO program, which is a wellness and academic skills building program assisting college students to successfully re-enter college and complete higher education. He also teaches the LEAD BU program on campus, and that is a wellness and academic seminar that helps students to learn strategies for academic success, explore values, goals, access campus supports, as well as develop skills for healthy interpersonal relationships. Additionally, he supervises 12 peer academic coaches, which we'll hear about today. So really, which is students who are living with mental health challenges. And then prior to working at the center, he worked with the enrollment offices as well as resident life offices within Boston University. And we are also joined by Avery Afoji. Avery is a senior at Boston University, studying cell, molecular, and genetic biology with a minor in African studies. Ms. Afoji is Nigerian-born American, born and raised in South Carolina, and is passionate about interpersonal connections and college health. Ms. Afoji states, "I am a peer academic coach because I want to help equip my peers with tools to navigate their college while practicing wellness." In her free time, she takes spin classes at Fenway. She likes to try new restaurants around the city with friends. And she's also a volunteer at the Brigham and Women's, interviewing patients for the My Life, My Story program. So without further ado, we welcome Paul and Avery to present on the peer coaching program. Paul, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you and Avery.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Russell, for that introduction. And thank you all for joining us today to listen to our presentation. I just went ahead and joined my screen, so hopefully everyone can take a look at that. As Jessica mentioned, we are here to talk about a research study in a program that we have disseminated at Boston University over the past 5 semesters now. So we have entitled our presentation, "Navigating the Ups and Downs to Caps and Gowns." And we're going to be talking about a peer coaching program for college students with mental health conditions. Again, my name is Paul Churchia. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm an instructor and a college coach at Boston University's Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation. And I'm joined by my esteemed peer coach, Avery, who's going to be helping me out with the presentation today as well. I will go ahead and mention too that we are always using acronyms here. So we oftentimes refer to our program, which is the Peer Academic Supports for Success, as the PASS program. So if you hear us use the PASS program, that is why. I do just want to acknowledge our partners in this program as well, the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research, as well as some of our funders as well that have made this research study possible and have made this program possible here at Boston University. So thank you to them. And here's our agenda for today. I know we don't have a ton of time, but we will just kind of briefly share who we are. Jessica, you did a pretty good job of showing that, so maybe we can breeze over that. We'll talk a little bit about kind of why this program was started, essentially the college mental health kind of conditions that are going on campus and how PASS can support that. We'll do a brief overview, kind of a bird's eye view of what PASS looks like. We'll talk about the structure of it, but the real kind of bulk of this presentation is going to be about what peer coaching is. So I've been to a lot of conferences in the past couple of years too, and we're hearing that a lot of universities are using peer supports as a way to kind of help implement some other support on campus. So we'll talk about kind of what we do from a peer coaching standpoint and what we define peer coaching as. And Avery is really going to be the star of the show because I'm going to let her really discuss what she's actually doing as a peer coach and how that helps support the students that she works with. And of course, we want to leave some time for questions at the end, but we're also willing to take questions during. So if anything pops up, just please let us know, and we're happy to elaborate on that. So again, here's our backgrounds. I think Jessica did a really nice job of explaining that. So I'm going to move to the next slide. So we do want to kind of discuss why kind of PASS was created. And for those of you that work in higher education, it's obvious that mental health is a prevalent topic on campus. So we understand that roughly a third of undergraduates have clinically significant symptoms of mental health problems such as depression and anxiety, which is a lot of what we see with the students that we're working with. Students with mental health conditions who attend college experience high dropout rates, and it's actually one of the highest of any disability groups. And we also know that positive mental health is strongly correlated to academic success, to students' retention, to their vocational success, and also adult resiliency as well. So these are some of the areas that we're targeting when we're implementing the. This was a slide that we wanted to show because I think it ties into a lot of the work that Avery does too. We've indicated on the left some of the other kind of main barriers that we're seeing students deal with: anxiety, stress coping, time management, and being absent from class or missing a class and kind of having that snowball into missing a week or 2 weeks of class. This quote here was taken from one of the students that did the PASS program in the focus group, and they indicated that their art class had gone to an art museum, and I'm paraphrasing here, but that they were just not into it. They got anxiety about getting lost. They had never been there before. They didn't have any friends to meet up with in that class, and they didn't even go. They just simply said they could not do it. And we thought that this was a really kind of good example of what some of the students are dealing with, but more specifically kind of how PASS, how peer coaching can really help supplement and use kind of hands-on approaches to help students, not only with their academics, but also we target a lot of different areas to help them integrate socially and to help them feel comfortable in different environments on campus, especially for first and second year students at a school like Boston University that's so big. It can certainly feel overwhelming at times too. And Avery has done such a good job at this with really kind of doing some hands-on work and going out in the community and working on students' social wellness as well, not just their academic wellness. This is kind of a convoluted slide of text here, but I did want to show it as it just kind of outlines the PASS timeline. In May of 2017, we started interviewing coaches to actually become peer coaches and recruiting students to begin in the September of 2017 to be coached. I'm not going to go through each semester, but you'll see now we are in our 5th semester or going into our 6th semester now of the program as well. So here's kind of a brief timeline that can be helpful just to kind of orient you to kind of where we have been, students that we have recruited, and where we are now. So from a kind of an overall standpoint.
Hey, Paul, sorry, there's a question.
Sure.
So how did how did you get institutional support to even begin back in 2017? Sort of how is the argument framed? And I imagine it took some financial resources and other resources. How did that kind of go?
Yep. So that is kind of why I acknowledge to our collaborators on this, the Transitions ACR, which is from UMass Medical. This was a program that was originally designed out at Wright State University, actually, and it was for students that were more dealing on the autism spectrum. And UMass Medical kind of approached us saying, is this program something that you might want to disseminate at Boston University, but make some adjustments to it to work specifically with students with mental health conditions. So we collaborated with Wright State and UMass Medical, made some adjustments to the programs that was more broad on a mental health perspective, and we were funded through UMass Medical and our funders there to kind of get this program off the ground. Again, as questions come in, just don't hesitate to stop me, and we'll be happy to answer that. So kind of from a bird's eye view, what does PASS look like? We do a pretty thorough beginning of the semester training for all of the coaches. When I interview the coaches, I kind of always say that this is not a black and white job. This can be a really difficult job to kind of navigate what a peer coach is and what a peer coach is not. And Avery's going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. But we want the coaches to feel well supported, not only in clearly defining what their role is, but also a lot of skills, as it relates to responding to students, to building rapport, responding with empathy, crisis prevention, resources on campus, and techniques to use. So we do quite a bit of training in the beginning of the semester, and then throughout the semester, we do a weekly group supervision. So all of the coaches will come into the center, and they will meet with me as a group, and we'll collaborate on what's going well, what's not going well. Depending on the time of year, we might discuss, certain topics are going to be relevant, whether it's time management or preparing for finals, registering for classes and things like that. So we always meet as a group once a week as well. But having said that, I'm always available to meet one-on-one with the coaches as necessary. For the most part, coaches will reach out to me via text. That's what college students do to communicate for the most part. So they have my cell phone number. And if something comes up at any point during the week, and it's not just between 9 and 5, but they can reach out to me and we can, talk through a certain situation or any type of concern like that as well. From a general standpoint too, what peer coaching is the coaches are going out on campus and they're meeting with undergraduate students that have identified they're living with a mental health condition, and they meet one-on-one with the student on campus, really in a public spot. So it can be the student union, it can be a coffee shop, a study lab. Some coaches will go to the fitness and recreation center with the student and actually work out together. They'll go for a walk around campus, especially if the student's goal is around physical wellness. It's a great way to kind of build rapport that way, have a collaborative effort, and support the students' goals. And it also kind of normalizes the process too, and really kind of shows the peer aspect of it, where it's two young adults being out on campus, being out in public, having a conversation, setting goals, setting priorities, and giving them an extra sense of support while they're on campus. And it's certainly, not replacing the work that they might be doing with a trained therapist or other group work. It's just another sense of support that they can receive while they're on campus here. I did want to highlight kind of some of the more structured pieces of the program. I always kind of say that peer coaching cannot fit into a box, and each student that we're working with does not fit into a box. And I stress that to the coaches as well, that they have to be flexible and they have to be adaptive in order to do good work and really kind of support the student with their specific goals. But it's also really important for the coaches to have a good amount of structure and guidance when they're going into this role. So we developed manuals that help guide our beginning of the semester training, but also that the coaches kind of keep with them and can refer back to on some of the skills that we've practiced, on all of the resources that are included in there. One big thing too that I'll say to the coaches is that they do not have to be an expert on everything that the student is looking for, but they do need to be an expert on resources that are on campus or in the community, and then appropriately refer the student to that resource. And it's not just saying that this exists on campus, you should check it out. It's really collaborative and hands-on. I always kind of say, you'll probably hear us say this again, that coaching is about doing. We're not just talking back and forth, but we're actually doing. So if the student needs help, with their writing, then they are going to like email the writing center together. They're going to walk down to the writing center together and make sure that that appointment is done. So you'll see some of the topics that we include here in our manual that are listed as well. We also have some agendas that can be helpful for the coaches as well, especially for ones that are working with students that maybe aren't exactly sure what they want to get out of peer coaching. They know that they wanted extra support and that they wanted assistance, but aren't exactly sure what to do. So we'll literally lay out, like, here are some ideas about how to meet and what to do. You'll see meeting one, like we do a peer coach agreement that the student might be working on, the coach might be working on with their student, identifying goals, strategizing about stressful situations. And then as the semester progresses, you'll see, they might do a social outing if social wellness is something they're looking for, as well as some midterm preparation as the semester progresses as well. Again, coaches do not have to follow this, but it can be really helpful to have that guidance and have something to work off of. This is also kind of a look at what a singular meeting might look like as well. Again, I always stress that this is a peer program. You don't have to sit down with the student, immediately jump into business and action-oriented items. Be a young adult, get a cup of coffee, build rapport, talk about current events or what's going on in their life. I think that really helps normalize and build the relationship between the student and coach, which is really easy. You might do some logistics, some prioritizing, discuss a topic that we're going to be working on for the day. Again, it's all about action. We don't just want a back and forth conversation. We want to be doing rather than talking, so that when the student leaves the meeting, they have things crossed off on their to-do list rather than things added to it. We'll then do kind of a review of the meeting, set some goals for the student and for the coach for the following week, as well as discuss any final thoughts or concerns. So again, this is more of just a potential guidance that the coach can use, especially if they're feeling stuck, if their student that they're working with isn't talking as much. So as I said, the big part of our presentation is really kind of defining what coaching is and what coaching is not. And there's no better person to kind of let you know what coaching has been like than Avery, who is actually a peer coach here at BU. So I'm going to turn it over to Avery and let her kind of talk about the work that she's doing specifically. And again, if questions come up, don't hesitate to ask.
Hi everybody, this is Avery. Thank you, Jessica, for the intro. I'm really excited to be here and share a bit of my experience as a peer coach with everybody. This is my second year coaching in the program, and we've kind of outlined a few ways that coaching really manifests with the students here. So the PASS program is built for students with these diagnosed mental health conditions, and that clearly begs the question of where do the peer coaches fit in? Because we're not, we're trained in these skills and these strategies, but we're not mental health professionals. So the barriers inherent in that are what kind of guide our experience as coaches. And we came up with this metaphor at the beginning of the year in our training that if, a student who comes into our program, they have this entire treatment plan that is their house, then the peer coaches are another support beam in the house, but they're not the floor. And I think that really plays into the self-care element that was highlighted on the manual slide, so that the coaches can take care of themselves while they're helping these students. So I think peer support at BU comes from this mutual understanding of kind of our experience on campus. BU is a really big place. Like Paul said, we have just over 18,000 undergrads, and understanding kind of the dynamics of a campus that big and living in the city of Boston are what lend our role kind of the most most weight and what help us support students that come into this program the best. So a couple things that coaching is not. Coaching is not therapy, and coaching is not taking responsibility for students' circumstances or diagnoses. I think these are the most important elements really, to kind of hold that line of caring for yourself as the coach while supporting the student, that, you know, we can't be there in every possible way, but there are very actionable things that we can do to help our peers, you know, maintain their wellness or improve their wellness. And on that note, coaching is building authentic relationships. It's showing up for our peers in healthy and sustainable ways, and I'll emphasize sustainable. And it's improving and prioritizing self-care for the student and for the coach. So as Paul said, coaching really is doing. So a lot of the meetings that we have with our students are about, you know, not just checking things off a list, but making sure that we're getting closer to goals that we set with the students. So a few things that I've highlighted here that I've engaged with specifically are planning or attending social outings, studying together, reframing negative experiences, discussing and connecting with campus resources, exploring a healthy lifestyle, and formulating SMART goals. And obviously this is a huge menu of options. And all of the coaches in the program use some combination of all of these. There's plenty more that aren't listed here, but these are a few that I've used exclusively, which I can speak to. And I think the needs and the wants of the student are super variable, and it's one of my favorite parts of the program is that it really is rooted in building rapport and those authentic relationships with students, because no two are the same and no needs are the same. So, you know, I've had underclassmen who I've coached who have really benefited from more of the time management and the goal setting. But for example, this year I'm working with a fellow senior who is totally comfortable with, you know, the social conditions and just needs help with the accountability. So we sit and study together. So the needs of students are super wide ranging. And I think what the coaches bring to the table is this huge menu of options and strategies for how we can go about accomplishing goals and being actionable.
Yeah.
Avery, I'm sorry, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
If you're okay taking them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so first thing is, it was a few. So about how many students are you a peer for at any given time? As well as about how many hours, you know, on average, would you say a week are you engaged in peer coaching?
Gotcha. Yes, both good questions. So Paul's kind of helped us work out with a program that the maximum that any coach would probably have is 3, and that's if we were really pressed, I think, for staffing, I guess you could say, in a given semester. But I've had 2 most semesters that I've been a coach, which is very doable for me, and I think for most coaches that kind of splitting that time is very manageable. So we'll say 2 students for most of these examples. And then the hourly commitment per week, we spend an hour as a group in the weekly supervision, which is another good way for the coaches to kind of engage in that self-care, is that we spend that time kind of reflecting on our experiences without relying on necessarily like the details of what we've been going through with our students. And I spend at least an hour with each student every week. So I'd say most weeks that looks like 3-ish hours for me.
Yeah, and what's important to distinguish there too is that usually it's about 1 hour is allotted for each student that you're meeting face to face. But having said that, we stress flexibility and being adaptive and being mobile with this coaching process. So the coach and the student will swap cell phone numbers. So while they're meeting in person for at least 1 hour, there's also probably a good amount of communication happening outside of the coaching meeting. So it might be like you're setting a goal actually in the meeting, but then 3 days later, you're following up with a text. How did that go? Or if something comes up and, you know, they need to email a professor, Avery might get a text and then they'll kind of go ahead and do that, you know, even through like FaceTime or Skype and using virtual means as well. So there's a lot of continuity in the communication as well. So if you're meeting with a student each week, it's not like a week goes by and if nothing happened, you lost a week. We're really kind of checking in and having a lot of touch points throughout the week as well.
Absolutely. And BU's still on our winter intersession. We've been out since about December 20th, and each week I've been in contact with the students I'm coaching now, just to kind of keep that continuity and consistency. So yeah, the face-to-face time I would say is about 3 hours a week, but it could, reach 4 to 5 depending how much we're in contact over the phone.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And one other thing, well, first of all, I'll say thank you, Avery, for what you're doing for folks. But also want to ask, what surprised you? Like what, when you engaged in this activity last year, you kind of went to it, I guess, with a preconceived notion of what it would be. What's one of the things that surprised you the most as you have actually been engaged in it?
Sure. I think that a lot of the language around the program is heavy, and that initial training that Paul discussed, we get into a lot of kind of technical stuff, and I think my initial expectation of these meetings is that students were going to kind of show up in some level of distress, and it really didn't look that way. I mean, it was the degree to which it really is a peer connection. Maybe surprise isn't the best word, but that's what really impacted me, was that this wasn't about, figuring out every possible way that I could help a student and turn their semester around and make everything really bright and shiny for them. It was just honestly building a friendship and making sure that they had what they needed to feel and be successful. So I would say kind of that distance between what maybe the stigma of mental health would make you think, a college student's experience would be, and what it actually is.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. So part of our peer coaching strategy method, especially as it pertains to kind of formulating those SMART goals that we highlighted on the last slide, are to consider the 8 domains of wellness, which are emotional, environmental, social, physical, intellectual, financial, occupational, and spiritual. This usually comes up at the kind of the front end of peer coaching. Some of those initial meetings can be a little bit awkward. You're meeting your student for the first time and trying to get to know each other. And it's in this kind of like structured setting. It's not always the most organic. So I've tried, and a lot of other coaches have tried, to use the 8 domains as a way to kind of gauge and take the temperature of what the students' needs are and where they feel like they're, strong or need to improve, so that we can use these areas as ways to guide kind of what the plan is going to be for the semester, because there's, that entire menu of options we listed, and like I said, so many more. So there's a lot of ways that we can serve each of these domains, and finding ways to do that fit into schedules and, fit into comfort levels is really the hurdle.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that too, that, again, coaching is all about doing. So that menu that we showed you earlier is kind of, these are options that you might be doing as a coach. And the 8 domains of wellness, which is put out, by SAMHSA, if people are familiar with that, is a great way to kind of get a pulse on what the student is looking for, especially if the student that the coach is working with, isn't really sure what they want to get out of peer coaching. They joined for a reason. They know they want to get something out of it, but they're not sure. Going through each domain, and the coach might ask, tell me which domain you feel the most strong in. Where do you thrive? And tell me which domain, you might want to focus a little bit more attention on. It allows goals to develop. It allows awareness to develop. And it's a collaborative exercise that the coach and the student are doing. So again, we're not just talking about this, but the coach is writing this out, mapping it out, which we'll show you in a little bit too, so that something's actually, coming to life on paper or on a computer, and the student's really kind of seeing that come alive. And when you're doing a collaborative activity like that, it's certainly less awkward and kind of less exhausting too for the coach to be, handling or kind of carrying the load on a one-on-one conversation too.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And there's actually a question that presented. The question is, how are the students identified for this program? And so that's really referring to both coaches as well as participants.
How are the students identified, as in?
Is it like having an interest in having a peer support coach?
Yeah.
So, but also, I know it sounded like you do some kind of recruitment with peer coaches, but sort of how do you do that recruitment and that, what's that process like of getting folks interested?
Yeah. That process has certainly evolved over the past 5 semesters. Going back to 2017, it felt like pulling teeth, especially when we were trying to, get to the counseling centers and other administrators on campus and just say, hey, we have this program that we're doing. But when we say it's a research study too, I think that deters some people as well. But we, put up flyers, we sent out emails, I connected with administrators on campus, especially people in the counseling office and the educational resource center that, might be working with students and say, hey, this could be a good support. As semesters have progressed, it's become easier just because more administrators are aware of us now on campus. I'll go back each semester and just say, as a reminder, this is an option for students to take advantage of. Even some of the coaches will actually go into like the writing 101 classes or the English composition classes, which is filled with 200 first-year students that are in kind of a rigorous and tedious course load. And the professors have given the coaches, 2 minutes at the beginning of class to share our recruitment flyer, to talk briefly about the program, and then kind of reach out to show their interest. So we've taken quite a few different avenues. We've also done some social media work as well that's been helpful on like the BU Facebook pages. Each class has its own Facebook page, and we'll post on there as well, where we've gotten quite a few students that reach out that way.
So it sounds like, just to make sure we've got it, so it sounds like that it could be a referral, right? So it could be a student who's engaged in counseling or some other part of academic affairs that could be referred to the program, but also a student may hear the presentation in their introductory classes and sort of self-refer. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay.
So as we discussed, these 8 domains of wellness kind of give us our initial roadmap for kind of establishing a plan with our students for how they'd like to go about, accomplishing their goals in the short term or the long term. I found that the students I've worked with most emphasize intellectual, social, emotional, and physical wellness. It's not to say that the other 4, don't come up and that we haven't worked on those, but these seem to be the ones that are the most impactful during their time at BU. And our meetings kind of help define, which of these areas they most want to improve in or they're strongest in. So my job as the coach is to basically help my students identify the specific tools and action items that we can do together to improve their wellness or help them begin to use some of the tools that I can refer them to. So some good examples are one of the students I'm working with currently, started the year looking for ways that they could engage a bit better with their physical wellness. Boston's a bit tricky. We have, a great range of fitness activities and offerings and courses on campus, but time management is obviously difficult, and at a university with 18,000 students, there's not always free machines in the gym. So I referred them to the ClassPass app, which they can use at studios around the city, and there's kind of like a free window for that too. So that was one resource we talked about. Another is free tutoring resources for intellectual wellness. The university and a few spots around the city offer kind of like free workshops or tutoring or similar things for a variety of subjects. At BU, there's a tutoring center that offers free tutoring for every class that's offered here, which is great. Another example for social wellness is calendaring events and meetings, or kind of coming up with different ways that the student can engage with the community. And then for emotional wellness, we'll work together on building or maintaining connections with their mental health professional or the support network that is most directly related to their mental health condition. And this isn't always a prerequisite for the program that our students share kind of what their diagnosis is, and it's not something that we ask. But to the extent that they do share some of that information with us, I've worked in the past on making sure that my students are, sitting down and taking the time to reach out to their doctors, reach out to their therapists, keep those lines of communication open, and stay on schedule with things that can otherwise be a real burden when, there's course deadlines and exams and a million other things kind of swirling around them. Of all these, I'll emphasize the social wellness, just because it's the one that really is the most impactful for me and the one that stands out in my coaching experience. I had a student last year who was a transfer student into BU, and she was, super social and used to having kind of like a wide network, and just was really having a hard time figuring out how to navigate, finding her circle and figuring out the city, and she felt lost in a lot of ways. And she said, I feel great about my academics, and I'm a strong student, and I don't have trouble with time management. My grades are great. I just need to figure out basically how to be in this city and make friends and feel social. So we came up with a really cool a Boston bucket list, where we basically went online and found every event and cool restaurant and cafe that we could. And we chose a different spot every weekend to either go try something or attend this event or just study together in a cafe. And in the end, it really helped her kind of get exposed to Boston and widen that kind of social network. And she ended up taking her roommate and a couple other friends to spots that we'd visited previously before. So that's a good example of kind of the direct way that we engage with accomplishing some of these goals as they pertain to the 8 domains of wellness.
And this is a great example too, Avery, of you kind of being a referral source. So when it comes to physical wellness, you're not, giving them this bodybuilding plan, but you're saying, here's an app I know about. We can download it together and try it out. Here are resources, on campus that you can take advantage of, and let's email them together. Here are some social events or places to go and explore, and we can go together. And then certainly as it comes to the mental health piece, again, it's a peer program. The student's diagnosis very rarely comes up, if ever. The coach certainly isn't aware of that, and that's not something that they need to be. They're just seeing the student as a student and as a peer. Sometimes the students will bring that up, or if they do express more concerns around mental health, again, this is where the coach walks a fine line, but you guys all have kind of the intuition and awareness to say, it sounds like this conversation would be more helpful for a mental health professional. Maybe we should email this to your therapist, and we can, do that together too. So again, the coach kind of has that job of staying in their lane and referring to all resources when need be.
For sure. And we'll show you some results in a little bit, but I think that's what makes them so exciting, is that they're really strong, and they're not dependent on the coach knowing anything about the diagnosis, which I think lends to how strong these strategies are and how well they're working. And this is one example of a way that we might sit down with a student and develop some of these goals. So this is a worksheet that I've used with my students, where we'll sit down together, we'll both have a pen out, and we're both writing on the page to draft goals that are reasonable for them. And this is a SMART goals worksheet so that we can come up with something specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound to accomplish really any goal that they think is necessary and relevant within those 8 domains of wellness. So this is typically something I'd use in the first couple weeks of coaching. And having this kind of written history of what the student has set out to do ends up being super beneficial at the end of the semester, and again at the end of the year, when we can kind of pull out these copies of goals that we've written down for them and seeing the ways that they have met them and set new goals and achieved well beyond what they initially thought.
Yeah. So again, another good example of something that might be happening in the peer coach meeting if it was relevant. And the 8 domains of wellness oftentimes lead into goal setting. And then you might introduce that this is a way to set goals in an effective way too. And again, it's not just talking about them, it's putting it on paper, having it come to life, and introducing the student to a different strategy as it relates to goal setting too.
And this is a picture of the beautiful city of Boston, just to re-emphasize that a lot of the coaching is doing, and a big part of my coaching experience has been exploring the city with students and working on that social wellness aspect, to make sure that they feel connected to the city and to our school and community in the ways that they want to be.
Yeah, a good example of how, Avery, you're great at this too, about kind of getting students outside of the BU bubble, which I think sometimes they can feel a little trapped in too. So you've done a great job of exploring the city. I mentioned this to Jessica and Russell earlier. This is not indicative of what Boston looks like right now, if you're all wondering. It is 36 degrees and a cold rain.
Hey, y'all. So we have a question for you. This has, the question is there a documentation process for progress throughout the semester that is submitted for the study? And you all may get to that in your next slides, but just wanted to pose that question to you right now.
So the coach fills out a weekly log. So at the end of each meeting, they will fill out kind of what strategies they were working on with the student, how it went, challenges that came up. So yes, they are filling out some type of documentation each week that the research team is kind of looking at to see kind of what's working, what's not working, what you're doing, what you're not doing. And also at the end of each semester, the research team too will run focus groups for the coaches and then for all the students that are involved as well. So that's kind of how it's documented and the progress is documented. But yeah, so a weekly coaching log is filled out every week.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. You kind of alluded to this at the beginning, but maybe a little bit more detail. How are the peer coaches selected? Are there any specific requirements that you have when you're interviewing candidates?
It's a short kind of interview process with me. First I'll kind of advertise on the student employment website that we're recruiting for this job, or even sometimes the peer coaches will say, I know somebody that I think will be a good fit for this role, which oftentimes has kind of turned into the best fits for the job because it is a unique position. But when I'm interviewing students, I'm really, looking for someone that quote unquote gets it, that college isn't always the best 4 years of your life, and that being a student with a mental health challenge comes with a lot of barriers and obstacles. And I want the student to be able to kind of recognize that. I want the coach to kind of not sit there and say, here's what to do, I know what to do, here's how we're going to do it. I want them to be able to listen to a student. I want them to be able to respond with empathy and then collaborate as a team, make suggestions, and then practice implementing some strategies rather than just saying, I hear you're saying you have this problem, here's how we're going to fix it. I always tell the coaches that they don't have the answers. Things might have worked for them, but they're not going to work for your students. So just be willing to be, again, that flexibility, the openness, and kind of more of a suggestion piece. Would it be helpful to try this? And let the student really own their own process there, rather than the coach owning it as well. So it's those are kind of a few of the qualities that I'm trying to detect when I'm interviewing each potential coach, which usually lasts around 30 minutes or so, something like that.
Sure.
Great, thank you.
And speaking of looking at a fit, there's actually a few more questions, but one question specifically is around a matching process. So really making sure that there is that appropriate fit between the peer coach and then the student. So is there any sort of matching process that's maybe involved?
Yes. So the student that joins the study will fill out a short questionnaire, essentially asking their age, where they're from, what their major is, what their interests are, what they're looking to get out of peer coaching, if there's anything specific that they want to be working on in peer coaching too. And I'll take a look at that and then match them up with, the most appropriate coach from my perspective as well. And I don't really think we've ever had an issue with kind of a bad match or someone saying this isn't working.
Sure.
Can we switch?
I think it's only stood to benefit. And one of my matches last year, kind of remarked to me a few points during the year, and especially by the time she left, that having the same kind of racial and ethnic background made a huge difference in her experience. And it's something that I definitely owe to Paul for kind of picking out that was an element of her experience that she was looking for a bit of solidarity on. So the matching process definitely helps that we can kind of be specific. But yeah, we've never had a bad situation.
That's great. Yeah, you want to say?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, a couple more questions. So it kind of a springboards from what Avery had just mentioned. So part of, I guess, what you'd be looking for is the best you could, a diverse, culturally, racially diverse group of peer coaches that to some degree match the student population. So kind of, I guess, anything about that, but also cultural competency training, because we all have intersecting identities. So, you know, we all have things to learn. How do you kind of address, I guess, race and culture of your coaches?
I love this question.
Avery loves the question, so I'm going to bat it to her.
Okay, Avery.
I think a lot of the energy comes from the coaches themselves. I mean, I think we see the disparities across campus and the need for that kind of solidarity and recognition. Some of the work we've all done together in the past. I have another role on campus as a student health ambassador, so I work in our wellness and prevention services office to build programming and events for the campus. And we put on a Q&A event every year called the LGBT Q&A for our LGBTQIA plus peers on campus. And what we all did as coaches was go to the event and participate. And, you know, it was something that I was doing anyway, but having all of our coaches there to kind of engage in that bit of education, it goes so far with the coaching experience, because just having that slight kind of broadening of the view of the campus, of the student experience, of the kind of humanistic experience, really helps us engage in the work in ways that are more intentional.
Sure.
And it's something that's definitely come up in the rest of our supervision meetings, that, you know, we can always stand to grow, I think, in terms of like our culture of humility and inclusion, and especially in like our recruitment and things like that. And it's a question I've had about the, you know, recruiting students who participate in the research, that, you know, making sure they feel represented and seen and heard in all the ways that they should be.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, where I'm recognizing my own limitations there too, where if an event like that is on campus where there's some type of you know, cultural competency or the LGBTQ community, rather than weekly supervision that week, I might send all the coaches to that, and recognize that, you know, they might gain better perspective from that rather than us talking
That's awesome.
about the group too. So it's kind of the same referral process. Where it's just a peer coach, I would want them to refer to other people, and as the peer coach supervisor, I'm doing the same thing.
Awesome.
All right, so we have 9 minutes. We have two more questions before we all keep going, if you don't mind.
So we have a few more slides. I'll get through that. And we'll take as much. Is that all right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So again, we've kind of talked about, like, we're taking a lot of action when we are you know, coaching students, and this is an example of, you know, of mapping that I've kind of introduced to coaches to use as a technique. So a lot of different people are using mapping. This is an example of a supports map that I might have the coach do with the student, you know, early on in the semester. And again, it's really, if this isn't relevant or not something the student wants to be working on, the coach doesn't have to do it, but they kind of have this tool in their back pocket. I ask them to do this for a couple of reasons. One, for the student they're working with to recognize, wow, I do have a lot of supports in my life, but sometimes you kind of have to just think about it a little bit more. And when you draw it out like this, or do kind of a unique activity like this, again, it's coming to life. And now the coach and the student are doing a collaborative exercise together that's building rapport, and the coach is kind of running this, the student's talking about it. And their supports are kind of on paper there for them to go back to when things maybe aren't going well in the semester. Doing a supports map also kind of recognizes, you know, if the student is feeling distressed, if they're feeling, you know, in crisis and it's midnight, who are you going to? Because it's not the peer coach. I don't want the peer coach to be stuck in a sticky situation. So by identifying their supports, their crisis supports, if something comes up at a certain time, the student kind of has this map done, and they kind of know, here's who I'm going to when this type of situation arises. So this is an example of the supports map, but we do maps around anything as it relates to kind of any topic too. And these are things that we'll kind of create or go over in weekly supervision as well. So a lot of the coaches will take advantage of an activity like this. Sometimes even the coach will say, like, I'm meeting with my student and we just simply don't have anything to do, which kind of floors me sometimes when I hear that, because, you know, all the individuals in this research study are full-time students at Boston University, which is a pretty rigorous university. So I'll tell them, like, coaching takes place in so many different forms, and you can study together, be a peer, and recognize that there's a lot of homework to do. There's a lot of research and writing to do. And sometimes we'll use like the teach to learn technique. Sometimes it's described as the Feynman technique, where the student will actually be like teaching a subject that they have a test on coming up or something like that to the coach. And the coach kind of stands back there and asks why, and asks them to explain this. And it's a great study technique. And again, a collaborative effort for the coach and student to do together. And also if you feel like, I don't have any goals set, or I'm not quite sure what we're doing this week, bring homework to the meeting and do it together. Whether you're doing a teach to learn, kind of a collaborative activity, or even sometimes just like, let's take 30 minutes and you write your essay and I'm going to do this. And now the coach is getting paid to do their own homework. But at the very least, they're out on campus, they're together, they're providing accountability for each other, and they're getting things done. So sometimes it's a coaching, system might just look as simple as studying together, and that's okay. So I will kind of say right off the bat, I am not a researcher, but I do kind of want to show just some of the results from the first kind of trial that we did, as I think it's important. If I will say right off the bat, if you have more questions specifically about the research, I'm going to share my contact information from my colleagues at UMass Medical who might better be able to answer those questions as I can't. But if you're not a researcher like me, I can kind of paraphrase what this graph looks like. Essentially, in the small open trial of the PASS model that we did during the 2017 to 2018 academic year, students showed significant improvement in self-determination, their general self-efficacy, their psychological distress levels, time management skills, specifically setting goals and priorities from when they started the program to the end of the academic year. So to sum that up, results were really good. And we're still kind of working on getting some newer results to come in, but this is what we have so far and what I was able to share with you. Having said that, these are a few references for those stats I indicated early on in the presentation. And I know we only have a few minutes left, so we want to take questions, but if we don't have time for your question, this is our contact information, mine and Avery's. Please do not hesitate to reach out. And if you have more specific questions about the research, you'll see my colleagues, Laura and Marianne Davis, who also work on it. Their information is listed below as well.
Paul and Avery, that was awesome. I have a feeling there's a lot of folks listening wishing they had the equivalent of a UMass reaching out to partner on something like this. So a couple more questions. So what type of staffing is needed to support the program?
So to support the program, we have myself, who's the peer coach supervisor. I have a handful of peer coaches that work with me. Dory Hutchinson, who's my director here at the center, kind of oversees part of it at BU as well. And then Laura Golden and Marianne Davis are the co-investigators from the UMass side, and I think they have one more support that helps work on the program there as well. So that's about five full-time staff members. But again, this program probably only takes up about 10% of my role here at BU.
Yeah, and there's actually another question, which I think you alluded to not too long ago, that it is a paid position, but the question is whether or not it's work study or exactly how, that may even be funded through some of the grants that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so we're a grant-funded research study, but the BU peer coach position is paid. And a lot of the students or the coaches that I'll interview say, I would do this job for free. Mm-hmm. But a big piece is this is a job, and you're getting paid for this, and you're delivering skills, and it's a different mindset when you're paying the coach to do it. So it is a paid position.
Sure.
It's not work study. We get the money through the grant.
Sure.
It makes it really attractive. I mean, I qualify for work study and can fulfill that with my other job and also do this, and it's a perfect world.
So this is for either one of you. Maybe more for Paul, but Avery certainly chime in. When you're thinking about the whole program, and you've been doing it for a couple of years now, what do you know now that you wish you would have known at the beginning?
I know for me personally, from the supervision level to just kind of like how much time we're spending on activities or skills that ended up not being used. And that's feedback that we got from the coach. I mean, we'll spend a significant time on a certain subject, and we recognize that that actually wasn't relevant, and we needed to spend more time on actual like activities or tools for coaches to have in their back pocket. So I've kind of, you know, moved off to really developing specific activities for coaches to use, rather than some of the more like soft skills that a lot of the coaches have when they just come into this role.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Well, I guess we're at time. Thank you so much, Paul and Avery, for the wonderful presentation today. Thank you again for joining us.
Bye. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.